Good morning. We are here today to announce the filing of a criminal complaint charging Adam McFadden and George Moses of Rochester, New York with wire fraud and money laundering as a result of their fraudulent conduct in diverting $87,500 from the Rochester Housing Authority and its subsidiary, the Rochester Housing Charities, through a District of Columbia, Washington, D.C. consulting firm known as Capital Connection Partners, CCP, and ultimately to an entity known as Caesar Development, which was set up by Mr. McFadden. In the event of conviction, the most serious charges, the defendants face a maximum or a term of imprisonment of 20 years and or a $250,000 fine. At the time of this conduct, Mr. McFadden was served as an elected city councilman for the South District here in Rochester. Previously, he served as the executive director of the Rochester Housing Authority. Mr. Moses previously served as a chairman of the Board of Commissioners of the Rochester Housing Authority and was a member of the Board of Directors of the RHC, the Rochester Housing Charities. On July 7th, 2015, the Rochester Housing Charities entered into an $87,500 one-year contract with CCP to provide consulting services. On July 8th, 2015, the very next day, Mr. McFadden executed a contract with CCP known as a pass-through funding agreement, whereby CCP agreed to pay 75% of whatever money it received from RHC to Caesar Development, Mr. McFadden's company. As alleged in the criminal complaint, the defendants caused Rochester Housing Charities to enter into this agreement with CCP, knowing that neither CCP nor Mr. McFadden would be providing any real services to the Rochester Housing Charities, while also they concealed the fact that most of the monies under the contract would ultimately be diverted to Mr. McFadden through Caesar Development. Mr. Moses, who was the chairman of the board of the RHA Board of Commissioners at the time, caused the RHA Board of Commissioners to appoint him and another individual to the RHC, the Rochester Housing Charity subsidiary, and for the RHA, the blanket mother entity, if you will, to give RHC, the subsidiary, a $300,000 loan. In furtherance of their agreement, Mr. McFadden created various false documents and fraudulent documents which he presented to CCP in order to get CCP to enter into this pass-through agreement and to deceive them into believing that RHC was actually receiving legitimate bids for a consulting contract. Mr. McFadden further created fraudulent minutes of an RHC board meeting in order to get RHC to enter into a contract with CCP and to make it look like such contract with CCP was a result of an arm's-length transaction, when in fact it was not. Further, Mr. Moses, knowing that such minutes were fraudulent, provided those minutes to the RHA in order to deceive them into believing, once again, that this contract was with CCP was a result of an arm's-length transaction, which it was not. Thereafter, on August 3rd, 2015, Mr. Moses caused the RHA on behalf of the RHC to wire transfer $43,750 to CCP, who in turn, consistent with that pass-through agreement, sent 75% of that money to Caesar Development. That is $32,812.50. Following the submission of additional false and fraudulent documents prepared by Mr. McFadden for fictitious work, including invoices and the like, purportedly performed by CCP, Mr. Moses, knowing of that fraud, authorized a second payment to RHC, by RHC to CCP, and on December 24th, 2015, they caused RHC to wire transfer, once again, $43,750 to CCP, who in turn, again, transferred 75% of that, or $32,812.50, to Caesar Development. These transfers on August 3rd and on December 24th provide the basis for the wire fraud and money laundering charges contained in the criminal complaint. I want to commend the FBI for the tremendous work that they've done in the course of this investigation, along with the HUD Office of Inspector General. Their exhaustive investigation led to the filing of this criminal complaint. And obviously, it's a very sad day when we have to charge an elected official with committing a federal crime. But my caution to politicians in our community in Rochester and throughout the Western District of New York is as follows. You are elected to serve, and if you fail to serve and decide to take, you will be charged. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the FBI Special Agent in charge, Mr. Gary Lofer.
We're obviously not news people. Good morning, everybody. As the U.S. Attorney said, my name is Gary Lofer, and I serve as the Special Agent in charge of the Buffalo Field Office of the FBI, which includes Rochester, City of Rochester. I stood before you in October to announce the arrest of George Moses for lying to the FBI. I'm here today to announce additional charges against George Moses, this time for fraud. We're also charging Rochester City Council member Adam McFadden with fraud. In addition to his duties as a council member, Mr. McFadden also served as the interim executive director of the Rochester Housing Authority in late 2014. It was through his role and affiliation with the RHA that Mr. McFadden, in conjunction with Mr. Moses, abused the community's trust and engaged in self-dealing. In a nutshell, the defendants caused the Rochester Housing Charities, which was created to help advance the purposes of the RHA, to enter into a contract that would secretly benefit Mr. McFadden. When I last spoke to you about this case, I mentioned that crimes driven by greed are particularly common. The impact is even greater when the greed causes our public officials to commit crime. There's a reason why combating public corruption remains one of the FBI's top priorities. Public corruption tears at the fabric of our democracy and undermines the trust the public has in our elected officials. We estimate that public corruption costs the U.S. government and the public billions of dollars each year. Today's charges show our continued commitment to ridding Rochester of this kind of corruption. Corrupt public officials at all levels of government in Western New York should take note. Thank you. Mr. Kennedy?
I would be remiss also, too, if I didn't acknowledge and recognize the tremendous work that the white-collar and general crimes chief here at the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Western District of New York, Rick Resnick, who's personally handling this case, put into this investigation and prosecution. He will continue to handle the charges from here on out under the leadership of Agent in Charge Doug Gregory here in the Rochester office. So kudos to them, to the FBI, and to HUD OIG for this tremendous investigation. With that, I'll take any questions you have.
Can you talk about how this came to your attention, how this came to light?
Well, I think obviously as entities that dole out federal funds, including HUD, they take a look at the various charities and entities to which they dole out funds. Among those entities are the Rochester Housing Authority. And as a result of their initial investigation, seeing some abnormalities or irregularities, if you will, in terms of some of the manner in which some of the federal funds had been spent, that caused them to dig deeper, and then ultimately working with the FBI to bring this investigation into full focus.
Is there any particular reason why Mr. Moses and Mr. McFadden were arrested at the same time?
No, obviously, I mean, we understand that when we charge people with federal felonies, that's a very significant event, and we want to make sure that we have dotted our I's and crossed our T's in terms of completing our investigation. Once we are able to complete our investigation and we have serious charges such as these, we act with all dispatch to bring them. But we're not going to just rush to charge people until and unless we're fully prepared to present these charges in court to a jury.
Do you anticipate any other people may be charged in relation to this activity at the Housing Authority?
Again, our investigation, I think I said this last time back in October, is ongoing, and we're going to continue to look at all aspects of this and other transactions, if you will, conducted by RHA and RHC.
Can you talk about Capital Connection Partners?
They're a consulting firm out of Washington, D.C., and it's, as is alleged in the criminal complaint, I think that perhaps unwitting co-conspirators. They were presented with false documentation concerning RHA's interest in retaining them, and then they were presented with false information concerning the satisfaction that RHA and RHC had in the work which was being done. So I think that they were obviously integral to this this fraud, but there's no evidence that they were participants in it criminally. Okay, thank you.
One other question.
Sure.
Can you talk a little bit more about the Caesar Corporation that was established by McFadden, what the promises were and what was not delivered?
Well, nothing was delivered, but I'll let Mr. Resnick describe sort of the evidence of Caesar Development.
Yeah, Caesar Development is solely owned corporation by Mr. McFadden. It was incorporated in January of 2015. The allegation is it was incorporated for the sole purpose of this the fraud that's charged in the complaint.
Can you talk about what he promised? I mean, what did he present to the RHC that he would be providing for it?
There's a contract that's set forth in the criminal complaint between the Rochester Housing Charity and Capital, or CCP we call them, in Washington, and in there it has all the consideration and services that CCP is supposed to perform on behalf of that contract. And then there's another contract that CCP had with Mr. McFadden, which is the pass-through contract, providing that he was going to do the work. And it's our allegation that those services were not performed. And then to elicit the money, Mr. McFadden created false information that he gave to CCP, which then found itself on an invoice claiming that this information or this services had been performed when in fact they had not been performed, but that then caused the Rochester Housing Charity to make the payments to Mr. McFadden.
How unusual is it that there's a middleman, so to speak? CCP was sort of a middleman between Caesar Development and the RHC. Is that typical?
I can't comment on how typical it is. It happened in this case, obviously.
Thank you.